The palace of Laretiel floated above the city like a crown carved from light. Its terraces were layered in translucent stone that shimmered with the glow of orbiting satellites, and the air around it carried the soft hum of atmospheric stabilizers working endlessly to keep the gardens warm despite the thin upper atmosphere. From the ground, the palace always looked peaceful, serene, untouched by the restless currents of the galaxy. Those who lived inside knew better. Queen Vashara stood alone in a narrow observatory corridor, her hands resting lightly against the cool railing as she watched the night side of the planet drift slowly beneath the transparent floor. Rivers of gold and violet lights traced the continents below, cargo lanes blinking in orderly patterns, shuttles gliding silently through designated corridors. 3 years had passed, yet the silence inside her felt unchanged. She had learned how to rule with grief. It had become a skill, like diplomacy or command. She attended councils, signed decrees, listened to ambassadors who believed they were witnessing a queen at the height of composure. None of them saw the quiet moments between decisions, when her mind wandered back to a girl with wind-tangled hair and long ears that twitched whenever she was pretending not to listen. Senna had been 16 when she disappeared, full of restless curiosity and a habit of asking questions that made even seasoned advisors uncomfortable. She had insisted on attending the diplomatic convoy, arguing that one day she would inherit responsibility for relations with neighboring systems and should learn firsthand. Vashara had agreed, though not without hesitation. The route was considered safe. Escorts were assigned. Every precaution had been taken. Precautions, she had learned, were often just words that comforted the living. Behind her, the observatory doors slid open with a quiet whisper. Minister Iral stepped inside, carrying a datapad that glowed faintly in the dim light. "Your Majesty," he said gently, "the council awaits." Vashara did not turn immediately. "Do they?" she asked. "Yes, they are debating trade allocations again." "Then they do not need me yet," she said, a faint dryness touching her voice. They could debate trade allocations until the sun burns out and still not reach agreement. Iral hesitated, then allowed himself the smallest smile. "That is not entirely inaccurate." For a moment, the air felt lighter, and Vashara almost appreciated the absurdity of governance. How entire hours of heated argument could revolve around the shipping rates of decorative minerals that no one truly needed. Senna would have laughed openly at such debates, probably suggested replacing the council with a moderately intelligent maintenance drone and seeing if anyone noticed the difference. The thought lingered, warm and painful at once. A faint vibration passed through the floor as a transport cruiser docked at one of the lower platforms. The palace's systems adjusted automatically, redistributing power, regulating pressure, maintaining the delicate equilibrium that allowed a structure of such scale to float. Life continued. Systems functioned. The galaxy moved forward. Only memory resisted motion. Vashara finally turned. "Tell the council I will arrive shortly," she said. Iral inclined his head and left, the doors sealing behind him. The observatory returned to silence, broken only by the distant hum of machinery and the whisper of circulating air. She remained there longer than she intended, watching the slow rotation of the planet, letting the quiet settle around her like a familiar cloak. A chime sounded softly in the corridor, signaling an incoming communication. Vashara straightened slightly. "Report," she said. A small holographic panel unfolded near the railing, and the face of a palace gate officer appeared, his expression unusually tense. "Your Majesty," he said, "forgive the interruption, but there is a matter requiring immediate attention." Vashara felt a flicker of impatience. Interruptions were rarely urgent, despite how often they were described that way. "What is it?" The officer hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. "A young woman has arrived at the eastern gate. She claims to be Princess Senna." The words did not register at first. They seemed to hang in the air, meaningless, like fragments of a language she no longer understood. "That is not possible," Vashara said quietly. "Yes, Your Majesty. That was our first conclusion as well." "And now," the officer swallowed. "Now, we are no longer certain." A strange stillness spread through Vashara's chest, cold and sharp. "Explain." She is accompanied by a human male, a merchant, by his documents. They requested audience not with the council, but with you. The woman, your majesty, she resembles the princess. Not perfectly, but bring them inside, Vashara said. The officer blinked. Your majesty? Bring them inside, she repeated, her voice steady now, carrying the weight of command. Escort them to the reception hall, and say nothing to the court until I arrive. The hologram vanished. For a long moment, Vashara stood motionless, her hands gripping the railing so tightly that the faint blue veins beneath her pale green skin stood out like threads of glass. It is an impostor, she told herself, some cruel deception, some desperate opportunist seeking favor or reward. Yet beneath the logic, something older and more dangerous stirred. Hope, fragile and unwelcome. She left the observatory and walked swiftly through the corridors. Servants and guards stepped aside, bowing as she passed, unaware that the measured rhythm of her steps concealed a storm of thoughts. As she approached the reception hall, she heard voices, low, uncertain murmurs, the rustle of movement. The great doors stood closed, guarded by two silent sentinels. Vashara paused only a heartbeat before the doors parted. The hall beyond was bright with afternoon light, filtered through high crystalline windows. At its center stood two figures. The first was a man, broad-shouldered, dressed in the practical, slightly worn attire of a trader accustomed to long journeys. He looked profoundly uncomfortable, as if uncertain whether to bow, stand still, or apologize for existing. Beside him stood a young woman. For an instant, the world seemed to tilt. She was taller than Vashara remembered, her posture straighter, her face leaner. Time and hardship had etched subtle lines around her eyes. But those eyes, clear, luminous, unmistakable, met the queen's gaze. And her long ears, elegant and unmistakably familiar, caught the light as she turned her head. Neither of them moved. The silence stretched, fragile and immense. Then, in a voice that trembled despite her effort to steady it, the young woman said, "Mother." And somewhere in the back of the hall, a palace attendant, who had been holding a tray of steaming cups, promptly dropped the entire thing with a crash so loud it echoed like a thunderclap, scattering cups in every direction. No one even glanced at him. The sound of the shattered cups seemed to linger in the air far longer than it should have. Steam drifted upward in pale ribbons, curling through the sunlight as if time itself had slowed to watch what would happen next. Queen Vashara did not notice the noise. She saw only the young woman standing before her. 3 years had passed, yet recognition did not arrive gradually. It struck all at once, like light breaking through cloud. The tilt of the head, the way her fingers curled slightly when she stood still, the faint scar above her brow from a childhood fall in the Western Gardens. Details no impostor could know, no actor could replicate. Vashara took a step forward. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, almost fragile. "Senna." The young woman's lips trembled, and for a moment she looked not like someone who had crossed star systems and endured years of hardship, but like the girl who had once hidden behind the queen's ceremonial robes to avoid tedious lessons in statecraft. "Yes," she said softly. The queen closed the distance between them. She did not embrace her at once. Instead, she reached out, touching Senna's shoulder, as if testing whether the figure before her was real, whether she would dissolve like a mirage. She did not. Vashara's composure broke. She pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace, and the hall, accustomed to discipline and protocol, fell into stunned silence at the sight of their ruler weeping openly. Senna held her just as tightly, her hands trembling against the queen's back. For a long time, neither of them spoke. At last, Vashara drew back, studying her daughter's face as if memorizing every detail anew. "You're thinner," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Senna blinked, then gave a faint, tired smile. "You always notice that first." "I am your mother," Vashara said. "I notice everything." A soft, uncertain cough sounded nearby. Both women turned. The human man still stood a few paces away, looking as though he wished very much to become invisible. He shifted his weight, then attempted what was probably meant to be a respectful bow, but looked more like a man reconsidering the structural integrity of his own spine. "I apologize for interrupting," he said. "I can wait outside, or in a storage room, or perhaps a cargo bay." I am very good at waiting in cargo bays. Senna let out a short laugh, the sound surprising even herself. Vashara regarded the man for the first time with full attention. He was older than Senna by several years, perhaps in his early 30s, with travel-worn hands and the faint, permanent squint of someone accustomed to staring at navigation screens. There was nothing remarkable about his appearance, yet something in his posture, steady, patient, quietly protective, made an impression. "You are the one who brought her here," the queen said. "Yes, your majesty," he replied. "Marcus Hale, merchant, independent transport license, registry." "That will not be necessary," Vashara said gently. "You have already given me the only information that matters." Marcus blinked, clearly uncertain how to respond to that. An awkward silence followed, broken when one of the palace attendants cautiously began collecting the broken cups from the floor. Another attendant, moving too quickly, slipped on a fragment and windmilled his arms in a heroic but ultimately unsuccessful attempt to remain upright, landing with a muffled thump. Marcus instinctively stepped forward. "Is he all right?" "I believe so," Senna said, watching as the attendant sat up, looking more embarrassed than injured. "Good," Marcus murmured. "I once fell through a hatch during a customs inspection. Very undignified experience." Senna glanced at him. "You fell through a hatch because you were leaning on it while explaining, in great detail, why customs officers should appreciate poetry." Marcus sighed. "In my defense, they did not appreciate poetry." A faint sound escaped Vashara, half a breath, half a laugh, before she could stop herself. The tension in the hall eased slightly like a tightly drawn thread loosening. "Come," the queen said at last. "We should speak somewhere more private." They moved to a smaller chamber adjoining the hall, a room lined with softly glowing panels and low seating arranged in a semicircle. A service drone drifted silently in, offering refreshments. Marcus stared at it for a moment. "Does it always float like that?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Senna said. "It's unsettling," Marcus said. "It looks as though it's judging me." "It is not judging you," Senna replied. The drone emitted a faint chime. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That sounded judgmental." Senna covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. Vashara watched them, observing the easy familiarity between them, the small glances and half-finished sentences that spoke of shared experience. Something in her chest tightened, not with jealousy or resentment, but with the realization of how much of her daughter's life she had not witnessed. At last she said, "Tell me what happened." Senna's expression grew still. She looked down at her hands, turning them slightly, as if studying scars that only she could see. "It began during the second week of the mission," she said slowly. "We were traveling through the outer corridor of the Harith Expanse. The convoy detected nothing unusual. Then, everything went dark." Marcus sat quietly, saying nothing. "There were ships," Senna continued, "not military vessels, fast, unmarked. They disabled our escorts before anyone understood what was happening. I remember shouting, running, and then—" Her voice faltered. Vashara reached out, resting a hand over hers. "You do not have to tell me everything now." "I want to," Senna said softly, "because if I don't, it feels as though those years are still happening somewhere." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the palace systems. "They took us," Senna said, "those of us who survived. And after that, I stopped being a person. I was cargo." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "They moved us from place to place," Senna went on. "Stations, mining colonies, transit hubs. I lost track of time. I forgot who I was. At one point I was convinced I had always lived like that there had never been anything else." She exhaled slowly. "And then," she said, glancing at Marcus, "I met someone who argued with a contract broker for nearly an hour about the definition of the word humane." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "In my defense, it was a very poorly written contract." "It was a purchase agreement," Senna said. "Yes," Marcus admitted, "but even purchase agreements should have standards." For a moment, the heaviness lifted, replaced by the faintest echo of warmth. Vashara studied him. "You bought her?" Marcus nodded. "Yes." "Why?" He hesitated, searching for words. "Because she looked at me," he said simply. "Not like a buyer, not like a guard. Just like a person hoping someone would notice she existed, and I realized that if I walked away, I would remember that look for the rest of my life. The queen held his gaze for a long moment. Then she inclined her head, not as a ruler acknowledging a subject, but as one human, or near enough, acknowledging another. "Thank you," she said. Marcus blinked, clearly unprepared for the weight of those words. Silence settled in the chamber after the queen's words, a silence that was not empty, but heavy with memory. The palace beyond the walls continued its quiet life. Distant footsteps, the hum of energy conduits, the faint chime of transport lifts. But inside the room, time seemed to narrow around the three of them. Senna leaned back slightly, her hands folded in her lap, eyes unfocused as though watching scenes far beyond the walls of the palace. "The place where Marcus found me," she said slowly, "was not the worst place I had been. That is the strange part. By then I had already been moved so many times that I had stopped expecting anything to change." Vashara listened without interrupting. "It was a transfer port built inside a hollowed asteroid," Senna continued. "The gravity there was uneven. Some corridors felt normal, others made you light as mist, and some felt as though your bones were made of iron. The workers used magnetic boots to move through certain sections. I remember once seeing a man forget to switch the polarity and drift slowly upward until he bumped into a ventilation grill and had to be pushed down with a mop." Marcus cleared his throat. That was not the most efficient use of a mop. Senna glanced at him, and for a moment the shadow in her eyes softened. "No, but it was memorable." She looked back at the queen. "The traffickers treated us like inventory. Numbers, not names. They kept records on cracked tablets, arguing constantly about values and quotas. I used to sit in a corner and listen to them talk about us as if we were crates of grain. It was strange how ordinary they sounded. They complained about food, about shipping delays, about sore backs. I remember thinking that cruelty to them was just another job." Vashara's expression remained composed, but her fingers tightened slightly against the arm of her chair. "I tried to escape once," Senna said. "I don't even remember why I thought it would work. I had seen a maintenance corridor that wasn't guarded, and I thought perhaps it led to a docking bay. It led instead to a recycling chute." Marcus winced faintly. "I've seen those. Extremely unpleasant." "I slid halfway down before realizing where I was," Senna said. "The chute was warm, and it smelled terrible. I managed to climb back up, but not before setting off an alarm so loud I thought my ears would detach and file complaints." Marcus huffed quietly despite himself. "One of the guards laughed for 5 minutes," Senna added. "He said I was the first person who ever tried to escape by becoming compost." Even Vashara could not suppress a faint exhale of breath that might almost have been a laugh, though it faded quickly. "After that," Senna went on, "I stopped trying. Not because I had given up, but because I no longer knew where to go. I couldn't remember who I had been before. I only knew I had once been someone else. Someone important, though I didn't know why." She fell silent for a moment, and Marcus spoke quietly. "She used to wake up in the middle of the night," he said, "looking at her hands as if she expected them to belong to someone else." Senna glanced at him but did not contradict him. Vashara looked between them, absorbing the unspoken understanding in their exchange. "How did you meet?" the queen asked. Marcus shifted slightly in his chair. "I was negotiating a transport contract," he said, or attempting to. "The broker kept changing the terms every 10 minutes. At one point, he tried to charge me extra for breathing the station's air." "That is technically legal in some ports," Senna said. "Yes," Marcus replied, "but I object on philosophical grounds." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I saw her sitting against a bulkhead. She wasn't looking at anyone, just watching the floor. Most people in those markets avoid eye contact. It's safer that way. But when I passed, she looked up. Just for a second." He hesitated, searching for words. "It's difficult to explain," he said at last. "It wasn't a desperate look. Not exactly. It was patient, as if she had been waiting for someone to notice her for a very long time." Senna looked down, her expression unreadable. "I asked the broker about her," Marcus continued. "He told me she was unskilled labor, low value, poor health, not worth the expense of maintenance. I asked how much her contract would cost. And you paid it, Vashara said quietly. Marcus gave a small, self-conscious shrug. I argued first, for quite some time. He tried to increase the price when he realized I was serious. We spent nearly an hour debating the definition of the word fair. Senna smiled faintly. You also tried to convince him that compassion was good for business. I maintain that it is, Marcus said firmly. Repeat customers are important. Senna laughed softly, and the sound, though gentle, seemed to brighten the room. When he finally agreed, Marcus went on, I realized I had not thought through what would happen next. I had to ship some supplies and absolutely no idea how to help someone who had been treated as property for years. You did better than most, Senna said. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. The first meal I gave her was a disaster. You burned it, Senna said. I did not burn it, Marcus protested. I overcooked it slightly. It was black, Senna said. It was, well done. It was carbon, Marcus sighed. Cooking is not my primary skill. Vashara listened, struck by how ordinary the conversation sounded, how strangely gentle. It was difficult to reconcile these small, almost domestic memories with the vast machinery of interstellar trade and exploitation that had shaped them. What happened after that? She asked. We traveled, Senna said, at first only because there was nowhere else to go. Marcus took small contracts, transporting goods between minor colonies. I stayed on the ship. I watched the stars. Her eyes softened slightly as if remembering. I began to sleep again, to dream. Sometimes the dreams were frightening, but sometimes I dreamed of gardens and sunlight and music I could not quite remember. Marcus smiled faintly. She also developed a habit of reorganizing my cargo hold. It was inefficient, Senna said. It was organized by color, Marcus replied. That is a perfectly valid system. For art supplies, perhaps, less so for industrial machinery. Senna's lips curved slightly. The room grew quiet again, but this time the silence was warmer, filled not only with pain, but with the quiet resilience of survival. Vashara looked at her daughter, truly looked, seeing not only the child she had lost, but the woman who had endured and changed and somehow returned. And for the first time in 3 years, the weight in her chest felt lighter. Marcus did not notice at first that the Queen was studying him with a level of attention that made most diplomats uncomfortable. He was too busy examining the curved ceiling of the chamber, clearly fascinated by the faint constellations of light drifting across it. Is that a star map? He asked quietly. Senna glanced upward. Yes, it updates in real time. Marcus blinked. That seems excessive. It helps with navigation planning and ceremonial symbolism, Vashara said. Marcus considered this. I suppose if one has a ceiling, one might as well make it useful. Senna covered a smile. For a moment the conversation drifted into silence again, but this time it was Marcus who spoke. After I bought her contract, he said, the first problem was that she didn't trust me. That was not a problem, Senna said calmly. That was a rational response. Marcus lifted a hand in acknowledgement. Fair. He leaned back slightly, remembering. She wouldn't sleep in the cabin at first. She stayed near the cargo bay door, as if she expected someone to come and take her back. The first week, I don't think she spoke more than 3 sentences. Senna's gaze lowered, but she did not contradict him. I tried to make conversation, Marcus continued. That was not very successful. At one point, I spent 20 minutes explaining the difference between 3 types of fuel injectors. That was a terrible conversation, Senna said. I thought it was informative. It was deeply boring. Marcus sighed. I was trying to be helpful. Senna's eyes softened slightly. I know. Vashara listened quietly, her attention fixed on every detail. These small fragments mattered. They were pieces of the years she had lost, the life her daughter had lived far beyond her reach. What changed? The Queen asked. Marcus hesitated, then said, a mechanical failure. Senna let out a faint breath that might almost have been a laugh. The environmental regulator broke, Marcus said. Nothing catastrophic, but the temperature in the ship started dropping. I was halfway inside a maintenance panel, trying to repair it, when I realized I couldn't reach a coupling without another pair of hands. He glanced at Senna. I asked her to help. She refused. I did not refuse, Senna said. I declined. You declined repeatedly. I had no reason to believe I could help. Marcus spread his hands. So I explained that if the regulator failed completely, we would both freeze. That seemed to persuade her. Senna leaned back slightly, remembering. The tool was too heavy, she said, and I had never repaired anything before. But you kept explaining what to do, slowly, without raising your voice. Marcus shrugged. Raising my voice rarely improves mechanical performance. And when we finished, Senna said quietly, you thanked me. Marcus blinked. Of course I did. No one had thanked me for anything in a long time, Senna said. The words hung in the air, simple and heavy. Vashara felt a tightness in her throat but said nothing. Marcus cleared his throat softly. After that, he said, she started helping more. Small things at first, organizing supplies, checking cargo seals. Eventually, she learned navigation basics. Senna looked at him. You forgot the most important lesson? Marcus frowned slightly. Which one? You taught me how to make tea. Marcus brightened. Ah, yes, that was an important milestone. You insisted it was a vital survival skill? It is, Marcus said firmly. A crew that cannot make tea cannot maintain morale. Even Vashara allowed herself the faintest smile at that. The service drone drifted silently into the room again, refilling cups with fragrant steam. Marcus eyed it cautiously but accepted a cup. I admit, he said, taking a cautious sip, this is better than my tea. That is because palace kitchens are run by professionals, Senna said. I resent the implication that I am not a professional, Marcus replied. You once brewed tea using coolant water. In my defense, the label was very small. Senna laughed and the sound echoed softly in the chamber, light and genuine. Vashara watched her daughter carefully. There was still pain in her eyes, still shadows that would not vanish quickly, but there was also strength, and something else, a quiet steadiness that had not been there before. What about your memories? The queen asked gently. Senna's expression grew thoughtful. They returned slowly, she said. At first only fragments, a melody, a phrase in an old dialect, the image of a balcony overlooking a city of lights. I didn't know what they meant, only that they mattered. Marcus nodded. She started asking questions about star systems, about diplomatic routes, about places she had never consciously visited but somehow recognized. I began to dream more clearly, Senna said. I saw gardens, long corridors, the sound of ceremonial bells. And one day, I remembered your face. Vashara closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. I wasn't sure at first, Senna continued. Memory is strange. It shifts, distorts. But then I remembered my name. The room was very still. I was afraid to tell Marcus, Senna said. I thought, if I was truly who I believed, everything would change. Marcus looked at her quietly. Everything did change. Yes, Senna said softly, but not the way I feared. She looked at the queen. When I told him, he didn't laugh. He didn't doubt me. He simply asked where we needed to go. Marcus shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the attention. It seemed the logical next step. You had contracts, Senna said, a ship to maintain, a life. Marcus gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. Ships can wait. People cannot. The silence that followed was not heavy now, but deep, filled with understanding. Outside the chamber, the palace lights shifted gradually as the planet turned, the glow of evening beginning to spread across the horizon. For the first time since Senna had entered the palace, the past no longer felt like a wound still bleeding. It felt like a long, dark journey that had finally, improbably, reached its end. The evening deepened beyond the palace walls and the glow of the city below shifted from gold to a cooler violet as the planet's orbital mirrors adjusted for night. Inside the chamber, the lights softened automatically, responding to the hour in a way so subtle that Marcus did not notice, until he looked up and realized the ceiling constellations had brightened. They move, he said quietly. Yes, Senna replied. They follow the real sky. Marcus tilted his head, studying the drifting patterns. I think I prefer real skies. They don't rearrange themselves while you're thinking. They do, Senna said. Just more slowly. Vashara watched them for a moment before speaking. You said you began to search for answers. How did you find your way back? Senna leaned back, her eyes distant again. But this time the memories carried not only pain, but a strange sense of movement, of roads unfolding. It wasn't one discovery, she said. It was many small ones. Marcus nodded. The first clue was a fragment of language. Senna smiled faintly. I spoke in my sleep, a phrase from the old court dialect. Marcus recorded it without telling me at first. I wasn't sure it would matter, Marcus said, but I've learned that memory often hides in small things. He reached into his coat and produced a thin, worn data pad. I still have the recording. Senna raised an eyebrow. You kept it? Of course, Marcus said. I keep everything. I once kept a broken pressure valve for 3 years because I was convinced it might be useful. Was it useful? No, Marcus admitted, but it was comforting. Senna shook her head, amused, then turned back to the Queen. We traced the dialect to a region near the inner systems, she said. From there, we began searching archives, public records, trade manifests, anything that mentioned diplomatic routes or missing convoys. Marcus gave a small laugh. Most archive clerks are not accustomed to being questioned by a merchant and a half-starved traveler. One of them insisted on addressing Marcus as Captain, Senna said. I never corrected him, Marcus replied. It seemed impolite. You also saluted him. He saluted first. Vashara listened, struck again by the strange mixture of hardship and absurdity that colored their memories. The search took months, Senna continued. We followed rumors, fragments, false leads. Once we traveled 2 weeks to investigate a report of a survivor from a destroyed convoy, only to discover it was a cargo hauler named Senna, who was very confused about why we kept asking him about royal ceremonies. Marcus winced faintly. He was not pleased. He chased you with a wrench, Senna added. I maintain that was an overreaction. You had been asking him questions for an hour. I was being thorough. Senna smiled, and the warmth in her expression lingered. But gradually, she said, the pieces began to fit. I remembered the name of the convoy, then the route, then the palace. She looked around the chamber, her gaze lingering on the curved walls, the patterns of light, the quiet dignity of the place. I remembered this room, she said softly, or one very much like it. I remembered sitting here when I was younger, listening to advisors argue about trade agreements I didn't understand. Marcus leaned forward slightly. She described the palace in such detail that I believed her long before we found proof. And when you knew? Vashara asked. Marcus met her gaze. Then there was only one thing to do. Senna's voice was quiet. We came home. The words settled gently in the air. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Marcus shifted in his seat, glancing toward the doorway. I should probably leave you to speak privately, he said. I imagine there are matters of state, family, and extremely complicated ceremonial customs that do not involve confused merchants. Senna looked at him sharply. You are not leaving. Marcus blinked. I meant only for a while. You are not leaving, she repeated more softly this time. The Queen watched the exchange carefully, seeing the unspoken understanding between them. Marcus cleared his throat. I assure you, I am very good at waiting in corridors. I know, Senna said. You've had plenty of practice. That is true, Marcus admitted. Vashara rose slowly from her chair. Marcus Hale, she said, and there was a quiet authority in her voice that made him straighten instinctively. Yes, Your Majesty? You brought my daughter home when my fleets could not find her. You kept her alive. You helped her heal. Whatever happens next, you will not be treated as a guest waiting in corridors. Marcus looked genuinely startled. I don't know what to say to that. You may begin, the Queen said gently, by staying. He hesitated, then inclined his head. Thank you. The service drone drifted past again, and Marcus watched it for a moment before murmuring to Senna, I still think it's judging me. It is not judging you, Senna said. The drone emitted another soft chime. Marcus narrowed his eyes. That one was definitely judgmental. Senna laughed quietly, and the sound carried through the chamber like a small, bright signal. Something fragile, but unmistakably alive. The palace corridors were quieter than usual that night. News traveled quickly in Larethiel, not through official channels, but through the subtle network of glances, whispers, and the peculiar efficiency of service drones that seemed to know everything long before anyone told them. Somewhere in the lower halls, a cook was already insisting to anyone who would listen that the princess had returned taller, thinner, and with better posture, though he admitted he had not actually seen her yet. In a high chamber overlooking the eastern terraces, Senna stood beside a wide window, watching the distant glow of docking bays, where ships rose and descended like slow-moving stars. Marcus stood a few steps behind her, uncertain whether to speak. "It's quieter than I remember," Senna said at last. Marcus glanced outside. "It's a palace. I would have assumed palaces are always quiet." "They're not," Senna said. "They're full of noise. Ceremonies, arguments, music, advisors insisting that very small problems are extremely important." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds remarkably similar to trade negotiations." Senna smiled faintly, but her expression soon grew thoughtful again. "I keep expecting to wake up on the ship," she said, "to hear the engines humming, to smell the recycled air, to feel the floor shift slightly when you adjust course." Marcus leaned against the wall. "You might miss it for a while," he said. "Ships get into your bones, even small ones." There was a pause. "I miss it too," he admitted quietly. Senna turned to look at him. "You don't have to leave immediately." Marcus hesitated. "I was planning to depart in a few days. I still have contracts pending. Cargo waiting in 3 different ports. One client who sends increasingly irritated messages every 12 hours. "That sounds serious," Senna said. "It is," Marcus replied gravely. "He has begun using capital letters." Senna laughed softly, and the sound eased the tension between them. Before she could answer, the door chimed gently. "Enter," Senna said. Queen Vashara stepped inside, her expression composed but thoughtful. She looked from one to the other, as if measuring the quiet gravity in the room. "I hope I am not interrupting," she said. "Not at all," Marcus replied quickly, straightening as if the act were automatic. Vashara approached the window, standing beside her daughter. For a moment, all 3 of them looked out at the city in silence. "I have spent the evening reading reports," the Queen said at last. "Fragments from the search efforts 3 years ago, logs from patrol ships, records of intercepted transmissions, all the pieces we gathered and could not assemble." Her voice softened slightly. "We searched everywhere we thought to look, but the galaxy is vast, and suffering often hides in places no one thinks to search." Senna rested a hand lightly on the railing. "You did everything you could." Vashara shook her head gently. "I did everything I knew how to do. There is a difference." Marcus shifted slightly but said nothing. After a moment, the Queen turned to him. "Marcus Hale, I would like to understand something. When Senna remembered who she was, you must have known that bringing her here would end your journey together." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Yes." "And yet you came." "Yes." "Why?" Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. "Because she wanted to come home," he said simply. "And because keeping someone with you when they belong somewhere else is another kind of captivity." Senna looked at him, her expression unreadable, but filled with quiet emotion. Vashara studied him for a long moment, then inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the truth in his words. "You speak with more wisdom than many who sit on councils," she said. Marcus looked faintly alarmed. "Please don't tell them that. They might ask me to join." Senna covered a smile, and even Vashara's eyes warmed slightly. The Queen moved to a nearby table where a small projection device rested. With a gesture, she activated it. A 3-dimensional map of the surrounding star systems unfolded in the air, lines of trade routes glowing faintly, clusters of inhabited worlds pulsing with soft light. "This," Vashara said, "is the region where your convoy was lost." Senna stepped closer, studying the map. Marcus joined her, leaning forward with interest. "The traffickers operated here," Marcus said, pointing to a narrow corridor between systems. "Sparse patrol coverage, high traffic, easy to disappear." Vashara nodded. "We suspected as much, but never confirmed it." Senna's eyes moved across the projection, tracing paths that only she seemed to see. "There were more of them," she said quietly. Not just one group, a network. Marcus nodded. I encountered fragments of it. Brokers who never gave names, ships that change registries every few months. It's organized. The Queen's expression hardened slightly. Then it will be dismantled. There was a calm certainty in her voice that carried the weight of fleets and armies. Marcus glanced at Senna. Remind me never to become the enemy of a determined queen. Wise advice, Senna said. The projection dimmed, and the room returned to its quiet glow. For a while they spoke of practical things, routes, patrols, the difficulty of tracking ships that deliberately erase their identities. It was not the kind of conversation Senna had once found tedious. Now she listened with a deeper understanding of what such decisions meant, of how easily lives could be lost in the gaps between jurisdictions and priorities. At last the Queen turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. Marcus, she said. Yes, Your Majesty. When you arrived, you expected to lose your companion. Marcus hesitated. Yes. And now? He glanced at Senna, then back at the Queen. Now, he said quietly, I'm not sure what to expect. Vashara regarded him thoughtfully. Neither am I, she said. But sometimes the future is not meant to be predicted, only lived. She left, the door closing softly behind her. The room fell silent again, filled with the distant glow of the city and the faint hum of the palace systems. Senna stood at the window, her reflection faint in the glass, long ears outlined in the soft light, a figure balanced between two lives, one left behind, one not yet fully begun. Marcus stood beside her, and neither of them spoke because for the moment, words were not necessary. Morning in Laratiel arrived not with sunlight, but with a gradual brightening of the orbital mirrors, a gentle flood of silver light spreading across the palace terraces. The gardens stirred first, thin mist rising from pools, mechanical pollinators drifting lazily between blossoms, and the distant sound of water moving through the elevated canals that kept the floating city alive. Senna walked slowly along one of the upper balconies, her hands resting on the smooth stone railing. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of flowering vines. 3 years ago, she would have crossed this balcony without thinking, hurrying toward lessons or arguments or whatever curiosity had seized her that day. Now every step felt deliberate, each familiar detail carrying the weight of memory regained. Behind her, footsteps approached. You walk very quietly, Marcus said. Senna glanced back. You walk very loudly. I was not attempting stealth. That is fortunate, Senna said. You would not succeed. Marcus leaned against the railing beside her, looking out over the city. I received a message this morning, he said. My cargo clients have begun negotiating among themselves about who gets to be most offended by my delay. It's becoming quite competitive. That sounds serious, Senna said gravely. It is. One of them has threatened to write a strongly worded review of my punctuality. Senna smiled faintly, but her gaze returned to the horizon. You're leaving, she said quietly. Marcus hesitated. I had planned to. There was no accusation in her voice, only certainty. I know, she said. You always intended to. They stood in silence for a moment, watching a transport shuttle rise from the lower platforms, its engines glowing pale blue as it climbed into the sky. I thought I would feel different, Senna said at last. Relieved, as if everything had returned to what it was before. And does it? Marcus asked gently. She shook her head. No, because I am not who I was before. Marcus studied her quietly. There was strength in her now, a steadiness that had been forged in hardship rather than comfort. The girl who once argued passionately about minor diplomatic protocols had become someone who understood what survival meant, what kindness could mean. You've changed, he said. So have you, Senna replied. Marcus considered that. Possibly. I now check recycling chutes before entering maintenance quarters. Senna laughed softly. The balcony doors opened behind them, and Queen Vashara stepped outside. She carried no attendants, no symbols of rank, only herself, a mother and a ruler in equal measure. I hoped I would find you here, she said. Marcus straightened slightly. Your Majesty. Vashara approached the railing, looking out over the city. For a while she said nothing, and the silence between them felt calm rather than heavy. "I have made my decision," she said at last. Marcus felt a faint tightening in his chest. Regarding? Regarding many things, the Queen said. The traffickers who destroyed the convoy are being hunted. Patrol routes have already been expanded. Agreements are being negotiated with neighboring systems to close the corridors they used. Senna nodded slowly. Good. But that is not the only decision, Vashara said, turning to Marcus. He met her gaze, uncertain. You will be compensated, the Queen said. Not with gold or titles alone, though those will be offered if you wish them. I would offer you something else. A position here, as a liaison to the independent trade networks. Someone who understands the routes beyond official maps. Someone who has seen the parts of the galaxy that diplomats rarely see. Marcus blinked. You want me to work in a palace? Yes. He considered this, then looked at Senna. She did not speak, but her eyes held quiet hope. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. I should warn you, he said. I have very little experience with formal clothing. That can be remedied, Vashara said. I also have a tendency to argue with people who use unnecessarily complicated language. That, the Queen said, may be an advantage. Marcus hesitated, then let out a slow breath. I would like to try. Senna's expression softened, and the tension she had carried seemed to ease, as if a weight she had not named had finally lifted. Later that day, the three of them stood on the highest terrace of the palace, where the view stretched across the entire floating city. Ships moved like distant sparks in the sky, and the great rings of the planet glimmered faintly on the horizon. Senna rested her hands on the railing, feeling the wind move gently through her hair. For so long she had felt like a fragment, a person without a place. Now she understood that home was not only a place, it was the people who stood beside you, the ones who saw you when you felt invisible, the ones who helped you become whole again. Marcus leaned beside her, squinting at the distant traffic lanes. I still think that service drone is judging me, he murmured. It is not judging you, Senna said automatically. Behind them, a drone passed, emitting a faint, almost suspicious-sounding chime. Marcus folded his arms. That one definitely was. Senna laughed, and the sound carried into the bright air, clear and unburdened. Queen Vashara watched them, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She had lost a daughter and found not only her return, but a future she had never imagined, one shaped not by power or decree, but by the quiet, stubborn kindness of a single human who refused to walk away. The city shone beneath them, alive with motion and light, and for the first time in a long while, the future did not feel uncertain. It felt open.